Welcome, everybody. Happy Thursday. Welcome to the first breakout session of the last day of our project directors meeting. We're so glad that you decided to join us today for this breakout session, an Indigenous approach to logic models and program evaluation. We know that many of you are engaged not only in developing or designing a logic model, but maybe working with a logic model to guide your program and evaluation efforts. So we're so pleased that you are here with us today and that we're able to bring this session to you. We'll go ahead and we'll get started with our next standard disclaimer, as we always do.
This presentation was produced under U.S. Department of Education contract number GS00F115CA with Synergy Enterprises, Inc. The views expressed herein do not necessarily represent the positions or policies of the U.S. Department of Education. No official endorsement by the U.S. Department of Education of any product, commodity, service, or enterprise mentioned herein is intended or should be inferred.
So before I actually introduce our presenter who's with us today, I'll go over just a couple of tips and logistical items for our session. If you've joined us on the previous days, you know by now that we're reliant on you to engage with us in that chat box that you see in the Pathable platform. Just to the right of where you see us, you'll see those four tabs labeled Chat, Polls, Files, and People. We want to invite you. I see we've got some folks saying hello in our chat box. Hello from California. Go ahead and say hello and let us know where you're joining us from today into that chat box. We have a number, we have a poll that we're going to do a little bit later. You'll be able to find that just to the right of the chat tab. You can also submit questions either through the chat or through that question poll that's posted in the poll tab as well. We'll have a little bit of interaction shortly here with a question for you to respond to in that tab. We hope that you'll participate. And of course, you can find in the Files tab the slides from today's session, as well as some other links that our presenter has made available to you. So welcome. I see some people from Fort Peck, welcome, and Nebraska, and Carmelita from Missouri, and we've got folks from Florida as well. Keep those hellos coming and keep your questions coming too. We'll pause periodically throughout our session for you to, for us to take your questions as well. All right, well, I am very pleased today that we are joined today in our session by Dr. Joan LaFrance. She is a member of the Turtle Mountain Band Ojibwe, or excuse me, Chippewa, Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa, is the owner of Mekanock Consulting, a management and evaluation service in Seattle, specializing in educational program evaluation, research, and management studies. Mekanock Consulting has a long history of evaluation of programs in tribal colleges and universities, tribal and indigenous communities, and not-for-profit organizations. With support from the National Science Foundation through a grant to the American Indian Higher Education Consortium, or AHEC, some of you may know this organization, Dr. LaFrance conducted research and co-authored the book, The Indigenous Evaluation Framework. You may recognize her name, as she has also written several other articles on Indigenous evaluation, and we're just so excited to have you here today. Dr. LaFrance, thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I want to say buzu to you all. Wabashki Manakwe Indigenous, as Tracy did. She introduced me as Joan LaFrance. I introduced myself with my Indian name. And as she said, I'm Turtle Mountain Chippewa. To let you know a little bit more about me, I'm a child of the BIA employees, Francis LaFrance and Naomi Jalaboy. Both of them were enrolled at Turtle Mountain, although my mom grew up there, my dad in a kind of Chippewa enclave near Fort Peck. I was urban raised. They ended up in the Portland area office, so most of my upbringing was in Portland, Oregon. I'm a mother of 2 daughters and a very proud grandmother of a lovely grandson. We are big soccer fans and soccer players. This young boy right now has just come home from his first year in college, where he's playing soccer. But I've always loved this picture because not only does it show him and our joy in soccer, but the beautiful Pacific Northwest with the mountain in the background, Mount Rainier. What I'm talking to you today about is built on the Indigenous evaluation framework, telling our story and our place and time. And as she said, that was a project that was funded through the National Science Foundation. And to develop the framework, we did kind of 5 years of research, and it emerged through grounded theory of doing a number of focus groups across the country about issues with evaluation and wishes that people had in evaluation, doing interviews, especially with some elders, reviewing the literature, and then we've developed the core framework and validated it through meetings and workshops all over the country. The objectives today are to introduce the major foundations in the framework and discuss aspects of building concept models that illustrate a program theory. And we'll also consider how to maybe indigenize a concept model and how to make sure that we are using our concept model to guide program evaluation. We have 4 foundations to the Indigenous framework. The first is the power of metaphor, then looking into Indigenous ways of knowing, focusing around core cultural values, and making sure that we keep the community engaged as we go through our evaluation process. First is the power of metaphor. Metaphor is something very common in our thinking and our way of expressing ourselves in our indigenous knowledge frame. And in this case, we had an advisory committee, and we were struggling to kind of figure out a metaphor for our project. And Eric Jolly, who at that point was on the director of the Minnesota Museum of Science, began to do a basket, to make a basket, a Cherokee basket. And he told the story of the basket from his grandmother. But in the process of making that basket, he illustrated how when he started, the basket would end up with an inner and outer wall. And we really began to realize that he said it was that tension between that inner and outer wall that began to give the basket its shape and its integrity. And that's when we kind of decided that our metaphor for our Indigenous evaluation framework would be the basket, because the Cherokee basket, because that inner and outer wall would be a way of explaining that the outer wall is program implementation, what most of you in your programs do, but the inner wall is program evaluation. And it's the tension, a very positive tension between your doing of your program, your implementation, and the evaluation that give your program its shape and its integrity and help it become a powerful program that is constantly changing and improving. So we really encourage people to think in a metaphoric way. We look at our Indigenous ways of knowing, and if we look at what people have written about it, our elders, Marlene Brandt Castellano, who is a Mohawk woman, organized our ways of knowing in three elements. The first was traditional knowledge. That's what's handed down through generations. And it includes our creation stories, our origin stories, our encounters between ancestors in the spirit world. And it can be based on our history and our experiences of the people. It reinforces our values and our beliefs, and it provides a structure for our civil societies. So a very powerful element of Indigenous ways of knowing is that traditional knowledge that we hold as tribal people. But also, Indigenous ways of knowing included empirical knowledge, which was keen observation and experiments in the natural settings. We didn't develop the relationship between the three sisters of corn and beans and squash planted together to keep soil healthy and productive without our keen observation and experiments. We didn't develop many different ways of surviving, especially through the years in our histories, without our keen observation and experiments and our ability to use our empirical knowledge. And fundamental to our ways of knowing is revealed knowledge, that which comes through dreams and ceremonies. And I kind of believe that we have room for all of these elements of our ways of knowing in our thinking about evaluation. However, evaluation tends to focus, and appropriately so, on empirical knowledge, looking at what we can observe and how we might organize our observations to find out new things and to reflect on what we're seeing. The elders say that knowledge is derived from communal experiences in daily life, as well as keen observation of the environment and what they receive from spirits, ceremonies, visions, and dreams. This is what Vine Deloria wrote. And I think it kind of reinforces what Marlene Brandt Castellano was saying. She doesn't mention that it's derived from communal experiences, but she does note the keen observation of the environment and also the revealed knowledge of ceremonies, visions, and dreams. The fact that we also have ways of knowing from communal experiences is very fundamental to our way of thinking about evaluation, because empirical knowledge involves not just what we can see and measure, but it also involves what people tell us, what we learned from our interviews and our focus groups. And our Indigenous ways of knowing, we use both of those when we do evaluation. We do believe that, as one elder has said in Vine Deloria's writing, we cannot misexperience anything. We can only misinterpret what we've experienced. So whatever you do, you've done it. You've made it an experience. And the important thing is to interpret that experience. We want to be very careful that we interpret it correctly and that we're open to what those experiences are teaching us. So we don't want to classify things too quickly. And I think that's a major lesson that we've got from an elder to think about when we think about Indigenous evaluation. We have goals and objectives and activities and outcomes, which are what we'll talk, because that's what's an element of the logic model. But we learn from what we're doing. It's not just a story of failing to meet our goals or achieving our goals. Indigenous evaluation is about storytelling. It's about everything that we experienced, and it's about interpreting those experiences. So evaluation is about knowledge creation, and it's focused on interpreting and learning from all our experiences and drawing lessons from what we learned. Interpreting requires ongoing reflection and not just analysis of data and a report. And if we think about our evaluation this way, our evaluation is not judgment. It's about reflection and it's about learning. And the old Indians also said that we were interested in finding the proper moral and ethical road in which human beings should walk. That was what kind of the role of knowledge was. So absent from this approach was that knowledge existed apart from human beings and communities. It's not like in a Western model, which is not to judge a Western model, but to just contrast. Knowledge becomes knowledge for knowledge's sake. It's that which is published and which we read in articles. But in an Indigenous framework, knowledge is what helps us walk along the road we are walking. So there's a moral responsibility to use our knowledge that we've gained through evaluation. So in that use, Indigenous evaluation views knowledge as active, as learning from doing, and our challenge is to learn and improve, not just render judgment. That's what our role is as Indigenous evaluators. Another element of the foundations was this idea of core cultural values. Now, when we were doing a lot of our focus groups and building the foundational framework, many educators told us that the problem with evaluators when they come in is they don't understand our values. And therefore, when they evaluate, they don't take into consideration our values. And so we reflected on that information and said, well, if they don't respond to our values, what are the values we want them to be responding to? And we kind of challenge every community, be you a tribal community, an urban community, maybe your own school program community, to identify what are the values that are important to you that you want to make sure are reflected in the way you do evaluation. However, for the framework, we had to find kind of come to an understanding of what we thought core cultural values were. And so we identified these four. They were being a people of a place. Excuse me, I went too quick. Being a people of a place. Being recognizing that every human being comes into the world with a set of gifts. So recognizing each human being has their own set of gifts. recognizing that we are oriented towards community and family. That is more important to us than individualism. And obviously, we believe in our sovereignty. So the next question is, once you identify values, how are you going to apply them to the way that you do evaluation? Remember, our knowledge is only important when we give it application. So this is translating values to practice, and in this case, evaluation practice. Being a people of a place, thinking about evaluation, its context writes the script. We only evaluate what's in the context that we are doing our program. Its culture, its history, its contemporary realities. That is what we're concerned about. We focus on what works in our place, this place, with our people. So when we're asked to take a model, maybe that that's been evidence-based, that runs a little bit counter to our belief that we want models that are really from our place. So we oftentimes are in situations where we're forced to take on some sort of model to run our program. But in this case, we have to negotiate to make sure that the models are adaptable to fit what we feel fits in our situation. Because we believe that that what works in one community is not necessarily easily transferred to another place. That's kind of some of the elements of our evaluation practice that recognize that we are a people of a place. Centrality of community and family. We believe in inclusive processes. We want to engage people in our work as evaluators. We want to engage staff and participants. We want our evaluations to be transparent. And we want the evaluation to promote community well-being, not just individual achievement. So we don't measure individual achievement only in terms of a story of an individual person. And that kind of relates to our other value, recognizing our gifts. We do recognize a concept that one of my mentors told me is a concept of personal sovereignty. Each person begins where they are and brings their gifts to whatever programs we're involved with. And so we should respect multiple ways to measure their progress or their participation, not just through some score or some element on a survey, but also through their personal stories, maybe through their photographs, through photo demonstration, through those kinds of opportunities that we can learn from in different ways to collect data as evaluators that allow multiple ways to measure program progress. And we always want to find ways to connect what individuals have experienced and achieved or accomplished through our program to what is their responsibility now with that achievement or with that understanding. What is it that they need to bring back to their community as a result of what they learned or gained from being in the program, so that we're always taking back that value of community and reciprocity that's so important to us. And sovereignty, evaluation practice, we want to make sure that ownership and control of data and the use of local institutional review boards is honored. We want to build local capacity. So if we bring in outside evaluators, we'd like them to help build capacity by maybe engaging participants whenever they can, or tribal college students, or our own college students in an urban community that can work with them, give them some honorariums to build capacity. And we always want to make sure we share findings and celebrate learning. The dimensions of community engagement are a little bit complex, but I'm just quickly going to say either we can have an evaluator control everything, or the evaluator can work with the community and be mainly a facilitator, and the community owns everything. We can look at the depth of participation, and we can look at who is it that participates. And all of this is a continuum. We might have more people participating at one point in the evaluation than we have at others. And we might have the evaluator doing some of the work, but then we might have deep participation with some of the participants doing some of the interviewing and the work. So it's a continuum, and we kind of want to make sure, if we're honoring community engagement, that we are moving down as much as we can on the continuum. So Indigenous evaluation is reframing Western evaluation. It's not a new paradigm, it's simply a shift in an emphasis. It centers evaluation practice to respond to tribal values and community needs, to recognize what values are important in the practice and what the community needs to be evaluated. And it guides our methods and informs our processes to respect our cultures and to engage our communities. Have there any questions that have come up that I should know about at this point?
So far, I don't see any questions in the chat, but we do have a few comments there about loving that reminder about focus, that reminder and focus about responsibility, and the quote about we don't mis-experience things, we can only misinterpret them. Actually, we did have just one question pop up just now. Carmelita writes, how does the Indigenous framework of evaluation translate to the current practice of evaluation within OIE, even further into programs under the Department of Ed? That's a pretty big question. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Dr. LaFrance.
Well, since I don't work for OIE, I cannot really answer that question, but I think it is a very good question to raise with leadership in OIE. We have had a lot of engagement with the National Science Foundation, asking people when they apply for tribal projects to show how they're going to use the Indigenous evaluation. And we've had tribal college projects, which are not basically funded a lot by OIE. So I'm not in a position to answer that, but it's a great question, and don't lose it. Take it to the leadership in OIE. I'm going to transition now. I'm also going to need some time prompts, because I left my watch at the other end of the room. So when you can just let me know when they're doing the word poll. We're going to look at logic modeling right now, because there was a request, I guess, to have more information about logic modeling. How does it fit into Indigenous evaluation? Well, if we consider evaluation as telling the story of the program, then I would say that the so-called logic model is our storyboard. It's our storyboard for how we think our program is going to happen. So I'd like to take a moment to do a word poll. But what comes to your mind when you hear the words logic model?
So if everybody is looking at the Pathable landing page for our session today, right where you've been entering in the chats, you should see a poll that reads, what word or words come to mind when you hear the words logic model? So you can click that and enter in your responses.
And I'm going to move quickly and pick up my watch.
And shortly, once people start entering in their responses, we'll be able to see that word poll, and it'll change and evolve a little bit as we get more in there. I see we've got goals, graphics, justifications, we got input and outcomes. Practical is a word that popped up there. Go ahead and keep typing those in. Our word poll or our word cloud will change as you enter in more responses. Oh, I see some folks are typing into the chat of their thoughts as well. We have SMART goals. So that using that acronym SMART goals, I know that's something we lift up a lot in our technical assistance work. Design, another word that came up. Oh, here we go. I just got an update. So let's see what else is coming out. Looks like outcomes. A number of folks have entered in the term outcomes. Representation, computer, hierarchy, image, process. Goals is another big word. It looks like several people have entered in that term. Inputs, outputs, impact, justification. I think I might have read that one. Vision is another one. Cause and effect, philosophy, graphic. Great.
This is interesting. Okay.
Yeah, that'll keep updating, but I think that's a lot of what folks have entered in so far. Flexible, dynamic.
Ah, good ones. They should be.
Connections, values is another word.
I'm glad to see values.
Resources, relationships, charts. Organizer. Intended is a word that came up. But it looks like our biggest words that probably have the most people entered, it reflects in the size of the words, are outcomes, goals, graphic, and process.
Outcomes, goals, graphics, and process.
Yes,
okay.
And activities is another one.
Activities. So I'm seeing that people are identifying elements of the logic model itself. Are there any negative words that come to mind when you deal with logic model? That word. You can put those in the chat or in the word poll.
Yeah, I'm looking to see if there's any changes here in the word cloud. Let's see, I see responsive, academia, pathway. Okay. I'm not sure if those are intended as negative things. Oh, here we've got a few responses in the chat now. Change is one word. And I think, oh, maybe this is a response just about what we think of when we think of logic models, process by which you attain your goals and objective marks. We have another commenter who wrote Western, maybe
Okay.
as a connotation or association. Oh, and Amber writes a negative word, colonized framework, as an association.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So yes, I would agree that the concept of a logic model feels very Western. The word itself is, I don't think a word that would come to me when when I hear it. You know, the model itself is usually presented in a fairly linear and a very wordy way. This one I got off the images of logic models when I went searching, but it seemed to me like it was a wonderful example of one, linear, two, wordy, which are uncomfortable terms, I think, for us in Indian country. But it does say, yes, we look at inputs, we get some outputs that are related to our activities, and we get outcomes, some that are very immediate and some that are longer term. That's our basic logic model. And here's the next kind of basic illustration: inputs, activities, outputs, outcomes, and impact. I find that, and I have heard that people, when they have to go through this kind of an exercise with a community, it becomes difficult. But I'd like to switch our thinking from this word logic model to what I call concept modeling. And that's not my term. A concept model is, let's see, it rarely, and my model rarely includes resources and inputs, but it could. I like you to think about a program as a concept or a hypothesis. We assume that a set of activities will lead to a certain outcome. That's basically an assumptions that we make, that these activities will lead to certain outcomes. And so other names that have been used for this kind of modeling is a theory of change or a theory of action, because our assumptions are based on kind of our hypothesis, which is that we have this theory that this particular action will lead to this particular change. And some organizations do ask you to, give you a theory of change or a theory of action. And I think they're all very interchangeable, although you probably will get slightly different definitions for each one. And I think we can map out this theory as a simple or a complex model. And the key is that the model helps us understand the story of the program. So if we think indigenously, we think of telling a story. And if we think indigenously about our modeling of that story, we would use the storyboard. if we consider it as as I said, we would consider it a storyboard of what we will believe will happen. So a model is a storyboard, which is another way of using metaphoric thinking to tell our story. And these are the ones I tend to draw. Now, I don't work in a linear fashion. I do kind of look at things more in a, I guess you could say they are hierarchical, but I don't see them as that as much as I see that we have objectives and we have activities and we have outcomes. And they kind of have, for me, this idea of coming from objectives down to outcomes gives me the sense that activity or movement is going on. And and our activities generally interrelate to each other. And so we set objectives up, we show how they relate to the activities, and the activities interrelate. I mean, all of those things interrelate in our programs usually, and they lead to immediate outcomes and to a final outcome. In this one, it's an Indigenous research center, and they wanted to collaboratively explore how Indigenous research methodologies, theories, and methods, they wanted to advance the use and awareness of this Indigenous research methods, and they wanted to build capacity. So they had a lot of activities. They were going to have visiting scholars come in. They were going to convene Indigenous research colloquiums. They were going to support cross-country discipline in STEM research by allowing people to apply to the Center for money and do a research project, and then convene an annual symposium to talk about Indigenous research methodologies. And then they were going to provide education and training to people who wanted to come in through their training modules and that they needed to develop. And then I think finally, I've got to move over here, they were going to house a library of Indigenous research methodology documents. So they would have immediate outcomes, a compendium of Indigenous research theories and methods, a dissemination process to disseminate them, that and the results of the research that they funded. They would have modules that would lead to certificates or other training modes, and they'd have that resource library so that there would be access to a greater understanding and use of Indigenous research methodologies, in this case in STEM research. This got kind of big here. This is another one, again, a little bit more, starting with this project had aims, not objectives. They had activities that I color coded simply to show how they kind of were directly related to the aim above it. And that some of them kind of were more insular just to that aim, and some of them connected, but they all kind of led to a short-term set of outcomes and a longer-term set of outcomes. In this case, it's a program to generate interest in tribal health and biomedical issues and research needs. And they provide to the students who are interested academic enrichment and personal development opportunities. And then they are trying to develop modules that can be used, or they would give students mentors that because I can't get to the top of that. Whoopsie, that they get to mentorship. And so it's just playing around with boxes and arrows and movement, and to kind of see, how would I build the interrelationship? How would I build my storyboard? And this one was much more complicated, but it did involve a program goals. It involved the resources, and they're realized by certain activities that are embedded in these Island Observer, Island Explorer, etc. There were products that each of these activities were to develop, and there would be some immediate outcomes and some cumulative outcomes. Now, this was in Micronesia, and this big thing was something called an islet, which was a local education team, an island local education team that would actually do all of these different activities, such as Island Observer, Island Explorer. I don't think it tells the story quite as well, but it was one that the team wanted to use. This was a fairly small program, but there were 2 stories in one program. The woman did some community organizing work, and she did individual counseling. And so in this case, I just kind of played around and did different shapes for the different kind of work that she did. And the 2 things became connected towards the end of the of the model to the outcome that we were seeking, which was increased family and community health, fewer CPS referrals, and more parenting education in the community. So the main learning that I'd like you to take away from this is that there's no one way to develop a model. The only criteria are that the model makes clear the story of the program, how what you do leads to intended results, was developed with staff and participants or advisors, that you used some sort of inclusive process in developing it, and it includes underlying assumptions, and it is viewed as the proposed story of a program and is revisited during the evaluation to learn how or what you might need changing based on what you've learned. Now, I want to say what's added. This is just a model. I took off the image using more of the linear model that goes from from left to right. But what's been added in this model? Can you put that into the chat? What do you see that's been added? Just anybody, type something in the chat.
Let's see. I think folks are thinking here. One was a question: is it the boxes on the bottom that were added? Camille,
right.
Camille writes that it, some context.
Well, that's exactly what I wanted you to notice, that the boxes on the bottom have some information. One is assumptions, and the other is called external factors. Quite frankly, I think all of them are assumptions. I like to get away from the idea of having too many things that you are classifying. So that's one of the elders said, don't be too quick to classify everything. But this obviously is a model for girls to be enrolled in a STEM education. It looks like astronomy camp. And so that they're assuming that all 50 students will remain enrolled. They're assuming that the resources will be available to ensure a nighttime observation of skies occurs. That's a big resource need in our area up here in the Pacific Northwest, where we have a lot of cloudy nights. So I don't know how they're going to ensure that resource if you lived up here. But then they have this thing called external factors. I just erased that because school principals continue to participate in the camp. I guess they're external because they're not the 50 students, but that is an assumption that your principals will continue to participate, that the students will remain interested, and that the partners remain committed to the camp. To me, they all fit that role of assumptions. And it's these underlying assumptions that in fact identify what your theory is. Your concept model should be followed by what these assumptions are that underlie the model. The model is simply the graphic, but the assumptions are really what our hypothesis is or our theory. And we want to look at what our assumptions are because we want to test our assumptions, just like we learned in general science that we have to test a hypothesis. We may do all the activities that we described in our proposal or in our program, but not get the outcomes we assumed. In this situation, there was something kind of faulty about our theory. And so our assumptions guide our evaluation questions and deepen our evaluations of our programs. Because we want to make sure that we are making a correct assumption that this activity will lead to this outcome or these results. And if we don't get them, we don't consider ourselves a failure. We did what we said we were going to do. We can't misexperience anything, but we can revisit our assumptions to find out what wasn't quite right about the assumptions we made. And that's how we really learn and lose the logic model or the concept model that we want, or the theory of change, or whatever we want to call it, to really think more deeply about what are the assumptions that underlie this graphic, and what is it about those assumptions that we need to test. We have the model that I'm going to show you again. It's called the Astane program, and it was the one in which they were going to provide outreach and engagement activities to students to generate interest in tribal health and biomedical issues and research. And they were also going to provide academic enrichment in terms of a program they would go through to learn about research, and personal development opportunities also to learn ways in which students can remain resilient and healthy while they're going through school. And they were going to facilitate access to mentors in the health and biomedical research community for TCU students and mainstream university students. So those are the aims. What are some of the assumptions that they're making here? Can we type a few of those into the chat? Just a few, doesn't have to be any, just any basic assumption any of these aims assumes.
So while we're waiting for folks to think a little bit on that question, I can lift up a few comments from the chat box. Some wonderings from Richard Myers. He wonders if thinking indigenously is also useful, excuse me, in Appalachia or any space of educational inequity. Some comments agreeing with learning about not being too quick to classify everything. And I see folks are typing in some assumptions that might be present here. So Carmelita writes, assuming the tribe is not active in their community and well-being. Chris writes, there will be mentors interested in supporting the program.
Okay, that's a big assumption.
Michelle writes, participants will be interested in having access to the project.
Okay.
And Kayla shares an assumption for the first bullet that students aren't already interested in tribal health and biomedical issues.
Okay. Well, let's look at the assumptions here that I put, and some of them I think you've captured. The aims are on one side, the assumptions are on the other, but that we are assuming that there are students interested in learning more about biomedical health and research. And that students will attend a summer institute to learn about research and biomedical issues. That was one of the activities. They had to travel to Nebraska. And faculty are available to teach students and provide support. And that mentors are available to bond with students and provide support. Now, in parents, I have there, first of all, we found there was very limited participation. So the assumption that students are interested in learning is an assumption we needed to revisit. That students will attend a summer institute to learn about research. Well, maybe there was an interrelationship between our limited participation and having to travel for 2 weeks in the middle of summer to Nebraska, because that's how the program was structured. We did find faculty, but they were mostly non-Indian faculty. And it was difficult for the faculty to build a mentoring relationship, to bond, when members were not at the institute. So we really had a lot that we had to do to revisit it. Since adjustments were made, it was open to mainstream university students, not just college students. The in-person institute went online and became more accessible because of COVID. And then the mentoring remained problematic, even though however, the program started providing training and clearer expectations and created online activities for mentors and mentees. So they're building opportunities for them to bond. So, assumptions were tested, especially with COVID, but we still began to think about using an indigenized model or a cultural metaphor in place of our model, so that we can still use the kind of models I showed you, but we can also look at a cultural metaphor that might be in place of our concept, our storyboard, or our logic model. And it's important when we do that the cultural reference is appropriate to use. And oftentimes we can engage a cultural expert to help in this case. You oftentimes need a skilled illustrator or artist to help illustrate and label a cultural model. And a metaphor, again, brings us back to that metaphor idea, is a powerful way to present a program story. Here's some examples. In this case, the reef net became the cultural metaphor for the program's model. And we have here the reef netter and kind of elder who was part of a community process at the college. That's the college administrator. And we can see here that we have these little Post-its to look at, what are our activities, where are our outcomes, and that sort of thing to see if we can make this work for us. So I want you to look back behind the elder in that picture, and you're going to see that they're also starting to list assumptions that they want to go with their model. And eventually, this is the final way that the model looked. The students, initially, we thought students might be the fish, but they didn't want to be fish. Fish end up over here in the terminal box. So they felt that given this program, they could be in some of these canoes. There would be faculty in one canoe and students in another. So that was through that community process that we got there. So the activities which were listed here are the rungs on the net. And the immediate outcomes are the people in the canoes, the faculty and the students, and the long-term outcomes are represented by the fish in the box. So that was one way to think about indigenizing a concept model. In this one, which was one of biomedical research, what we're working on, and we haven't finished it yet, is, and I'm looking at the time, so I'm not going to open it up for the questions. I think we go to 12:30, don't we?
You're correct. We got about 10 minutes.
In this case, after a meeting with the advisory committee, they said, we're giving these students a certain vision, like is illustrated in the blanket toss, which is what the tundra is very flat. So you would toss somebody up so they could look out into the ocean for whales or look over land for caribou and help the village be able to start a hunt. And so the blanket that's supporting the student who is jumping is represented by the mentoring support, the academic enrichment, the personal and professional development, and the recruitment and outreach, which are the activities of the program. And what we haven't done yet in this one, and it didn't work in the Zoom thing, if you see our model, we have a lot of space at the bottom, and we're working on how we're going to put outcomes at the bottom to be able to explain this program's theory or concept or logic model, whatever we want to call it, using an Indigenous reference. And I'm not gonna do this right now because I want to show that once we've done the assumptions, we can ask questions. For example, if we make the assumption that students will be interested in the program, an obvious question is, were those recruitment targets met? And what did we learn about recruitment? And we learned some very big things about recruitment. And then how did students view the Institute contents, such as holding interest? Did it hold interest? Was it relevant? Was it useful? And did it have influence on future college or career choices? How did the students and mentors describe the value of their relationship? And did the project influence content for TCU courses? So from our logic model, we have built a set of assumptions. Oops, I guess I don't. And those assumptions led to evaluation questions. So that is the process you want to use. Your graphic doesn't stand just alone. Your graphic has assumptions that are written, and then from those assumptions, you want to begin to look at your evaluation questions. And so I do want to get to this. Can you think of any cultural metaphors that your programs are currently using or could use with the right kind of advice from an expert to describe your program?
See, folks are thinking and adding their comments. So Michelle shares a metaphor related to basket weaving, baskets and weaving.
That is commonly used in my class when I teach a class for the University of Wisconsin up in Green Bay.
Well, see, looks like we've got some others. Building a canoe is another example that was shared in the chat box. Oh, we've got some more coming in here. Scott writes an acorn. Amber shares beadwork. Krista writes, traditional fishing net. Chris also seconded the canoe building. Natalie shared the native flute.
Interesting. I've never seen a flute, but.
And Amber writes, planting corn is a metaphor.
Okay. So you might want to use a what I call a concept model, as well as an Indigenous metaphor. But think about not just stopping at that required Western way of showing it, and think about how you could also add a cultural metaphor. Now, I'm looking at the time. This is a program that was done up in the Pacific Northwest, and it was called a logic model. They eventually dropped that name. They also dropped things like proximal outcome down there that I circled, because the whole idea is to have the model communicate. And so they started with a seedling, and then the resources are their roots, and the sapling was their strategies. Then they had the leaf represent their inputs. The actual tree was outputs, and their ultimate outcomes was represented by what a cedar tree is used to carve out a canoe in this area as their ultimate outcome. They actually made an animation of it. And we have a choice. We can look at the animation, or we can have a kind of a Q&A for the last few minutes. Tracy, do you want to give me a cue as to what you would prefer?
Well, why don't, if I'm not seeing too many questions pop up in the chat box, so maybe if you want to go ahead and share that that animation. And if you do have any questions that you want to, yeah, we're seeing some votes for the animation. um, so we'll do that, and that'll probably take us right up to the end. So I'll just say that, you know, I hope everyone can stick around. Oh, here we go.
Our land was once full of strong and healthy cedar trees. Our Lummi people and children grew strong like the cedar, with access to the resources.
Oops, 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 oops. I'm sorry. I kind of screwed it up. Here's my new share.
Oh, are you able just to click on that play? Yeah, sometimes it's happened to me too. If I click on something, it stops my video, but it looks like you should be able just to click on it there.
Gosh, I'm just not seeing it.
Our land was once full of strong and healthy cedar trees. Our Lummi people and children grew strong like the cedar, with access to the resources they needed to live healthy lives. It was a system of care based on the teachings and experiences of our ancestors.
But then came change. Very quickly and without our consent, many of the trees were cut down.
But not all trees were lost. Not all strength was gone from the nation and its people, and seeds of hope and renewal soon spread.
With the Lummi system of care, a seed has taken root in our community. A seed that carries our vision for a healing past and hopeful future for our children.
Roots connect resources, and working together, the resources help grow the seed and provide the foundation of a healthy system.
A strong system will grow strong trees, but for this cedar to stay strong, it must continue to be nurtured, protected, and valued as it grows.
A system that is nurtured will produce branches that reach out to capture and bring in additional resources that over time will transform the small sapling into a towering tree.
The cedar represents a healthy system grown from roots of resilience. Healthy systems are transformative by their nature. In our Chelangan, the cedar transforms to become a vehicle carrying our people and our culture forward. Standing together like the cedar puts us in the same canoe. Pulling together. By pulling together, this brings our children to new places and gets our children home.
So this was an example here that that of a system of care about how many of the elements within the Lummi tribe could be pulled together into a system of care. We want to just end with making our models useful. Always revisit your model that you included in a proposal after you have gotten your funding. And at that point, maybe you can bring in community more than you could when you were writing the proposal. And think about your model. How would you really want to draw it? If there's a cultural metaphor, what would you use? And include a good representation of the participants of your program in this process. List the underlying assumptions, which were the big ones, and which are the ones that are important to test. And then develop your evaluation questions and a plan for answering them. What are your questions? How will you collect information? How will you analyze and report? How will you use the information to improve the program? So this is a way I think we make our theory of change, our model, our logic model, whatever we call it, functional and useful. And with that knowledge comes responsibility. Old Indians were interested in finding the proper moral and ethical road upon which we should walk. So this knowledge that we gain from our evaluation should not exist apart from that road that we're walking on. We have a responsibility to use it and to use Indigenous evaluation to improve our programs. It should be considered active and reflective and learning from doing. It's not something that we do just to render a judgment. So with that, if we have any more time for questions or discussion.
Well, we have maybe a minute or two before Zoom is going to close and cut us off. So I just do want to, while we're still here, say thank you for sharing all of that. You've had a lot of great comments in the chat box. Folks who are excited to go and work on their logic models with their team, and thanking you for their presentation and expressing their appreciation for this approach. You might have a second to respond to a question. There was a question in there that came up, is how do you distinguish between the logic model? Sorry, I'm just going back up to look at it. And a theory of change. But I would say if you could get that in 30 seconds or less, otherwise you might get cut off.
I think that a logic model is a theory of change. You will get a lot, if you want to Google these things, you will get a lot of different kinds of comments about them, but they basically are telling you, what are you assuming about your program? What are you assuming is the relationship between what you're doing and what your outcomes are? And how do you write that in a graphic? However that graphic, whatever you want to call it, it's a graphic. And so I just really call it a concept model.
Thank you.
I think we have too many classifications.
Going back to that teaching about being not so quick to categorize, I'll definitely take that away from your presentation today. So thank you so much. And yes, the last comment there in the chat, that this recording will be available to revisit. We'll have that posted after today. And thank you so much, Dr. LaFrance, for sharing all of this insight and wisdom with us. Thank you for your time.
Okay. Thank you.